setting the stage. The election of Sam Brownback was, in a sense, the culmination of a long series of changes in Kansas politics, period. Kansas was a state traditionally dominated by the Republican Party, period. At times, it faced challenges, including Kansas's having been a center of the populist movement in the early 20th century, period. At other times, Democrats succeeded in winning certain offices, such as the governorship, period. However, Kansas voters typically defaulted to voting Republican, and for many years, Kansas had a long history of Republican dominance, period. During this period, the Republican Party was known for relatively low -key leadership, period. Two cases in point are Senators Robert Dole and Nancy Landon Kassebaum, period. Dole and Kassebaum served as Kansas's senators in the 1970s, 80s, and early 1990s, both leaving at the same time, period. During this period, Dole rose to leadership in the Senate, twice serving as majority leader, period. Kassebaum was also widely respected in the Senate, period. As a Senate leader, Dole was known for his very partisan tone, period. He was certainly a strong Republican, and had a reputation for being ruthless, which led, among other things, to a well-known satire on Saturday Night Live, played by Dan Aykroyd, and later by Norm Macdonald, period. Kassebaum was a conciliator, period. Kassebaum was moderate in her politics, in many ways, it is hard to imagine a Republican in the United States Senate today with a record as moderate as Kassebaum's, period. While Kassebaum typically supported Dole and her party, she was known for being able to get along with colleagues from both parties, period. Kassebaum focused on getting things done on behalf of her home state, more than partisanship, period. Dole, for his part, was highly partisan, period. However, Dole had a deep, and abiding loyalty to the institution of the United States Senate, and to getting things done, period. As such, while Dole's rhetoric was strongly partisan, even acerbic, Dole at the same time would make deals with Democrats, including President Clinton, if that is what it took to get legislation moved, and get things done, period. In other words, Dole was a strong partisan, but not nearly as ideologically conservative, as many Kansas Republicans are today, period. Brownback's rise, chronicled in chapter ? Marked a dramatic shift away from the values that Dole had, period. While Dole was a party man, Brownback's loyalty was to ideology, conservative ideology, period. As such, Brownback would confront leaders from his own party, if he thought they were not conservative enough, particularly on the social issues about which Brownback was so passionate, due to his religious faith, period. Dole put party first, period. Brownback put ideology, and his faith first, period. New paragraph. The differences are notable, period. Dole was a party man, loyal not only to his Republican Party, but to the party system, period. Dole was responsible for keeping the system moving, moving legislation, getting things done, working with legislative leaders and presidents from both parties, period. Brownback was an ideological purist, focused on his agenda, period. His goal was to shift the center of gravity of his party, and ultimately, of the United States Senate itself, closer to his own beliefs, period. The story recalled in chapter question mark, about Brownback's hearing from the Senate chaplain that each senator had not many but one constituent, God, is indicative of this difference in approach, period. It is extremely difficult to imagine Dole or Casaubon making a similar statement, or admiring someone else for doing so, period. New paragraph. Likewise, the state of Kansas's Republican Party had experienced significant shifts in the ideological direction, or directions, that it took starting in the late 1980s, period. As chronicled by Burdett Loomis in his book, Time, Politics, and Policy, a legislative year, the Kansas Republican Party began to split into moderate and conservative factions starting in the late 1980s, period. The conservative, quote, rebels, unquote, hailed mostly from Johnson County, the wealthy county located in suburban Kansas City, period. Kansas's Republican Party had long had a rural cast, which fits well with the reputation of this state, known as it is for being the site of the Wizard of Oz, period. However, the demographic reality in Kansas had been a shift toward a suburban majority, which had been happening for quite some time, period. Johnson County was the center of this shift, period. It is a wealthy, suburban county outside Kansas City, Missouri, period. Sometimes referred to as, quote, cupcake land, unquote, Johnson County was particularly known in the 1970s and 1980s for being the epitome of suburban, American life, period. Open quote. Pierce and Hagstrom, 1983, closed quote. Johnson County was also growing, period. At one time, in the mid-20th century, Johnson County's growth was primarily due to people relocating from the central cities of Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, the latter a smaller, satellite city of Kansas City, Missouri, analogous to East St. Louis, Illinois, period. New paragraph. Historically, Kansas's Republican Party was definitely conservative, period. Known for its strong opposition to the populists, the Kansas Republican Party was known for being conservative, in the traditional sense of being wary about change, period. Kansas's Republican Party's conservatism was a stay-the-course conservatism, period. Kansas Republicans were not known for being firebrands, as were its populists, period. Instead, defined perhaps in part by their opposition to the populists, Kansas Republicans became known for an incremental attitude toward change, period. One of the better-known products of the Kansas Republican Party was Alf Landon, father of Senator Nancy Landon Casaubon, open parenthesis, later Nancy Casaubon Baker, close parenthesis, period. Landon ran against Senator Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the New Deal period, suffering a decisive defeat to FDR, period. Landon did speak in opposition to the New Deal, and may have appeared to many Americans as staunchly conservative, period. However, in Kansas, he was quite popular, although he did not win the state's electoral votes in that particular election, one of only a few in which Kansas has ever voted Democratic in a presidential election, period. Yet Landon remained something of a hero back home, anyway, period. Landon's reputation as governor was not as the type of conservative that said no to everything, but rather as a Kansan, a leader who was apprehensive about change and mostly favored maintaining government status quo, and making only incremental change, period. New paragraph. Another notable Kansas Republican was William Allen White, the celebrated journalist from Emporia, period. White burst onto the national scene in the late 1800s with his notable editorial, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" In that editorial, which would later give its name to a book by socialist Thomas Frank, White wrote a diatribe against the populists, period. Open bracket, quote White here, close bracket, new paragraph. However, White's politics shifted over time. Open parenthesis, Delgadillo 2017, close parenthesis, period. White shifted left, increasingly embracing a role for government, and he was particularly close to President Theodore Roosevelt, who moved the Republican Party decisively in a populist backtrack, in a progressive direction, embracing a host of national laws to break up business trusts, create the national parks system, and more, period. In other words, White was a Kansan, in that he began his career with a strong criticism of those advocating change, and then shifted to embrace change as necessary, period. Delgadillo argues that White moved steadily to the left throughout his career, period. However, White was also known for romanticizing small hyphen town America, which he did throughout his journalistic career, period. New paragraph. Finally, one more Kansan to exemplify the state's Republican Party before the late 1980s was President Dwight Eisenhower, of Abilene, period. Eisenhower made such an effort to remain neutral as a United States Army general that few knew his partisan affiliation before he declared his candidacy for president in 1952, period. There was even some talk of Democrats nominating Eisenhower, before he came forth with his party allegiance, period. As president, Eisenhower again exemplified Kansas values, period. Eisenhower became known for his hidden hand presidency, open parenthesis, find site, close parenthesis. In the hidden hand presidency, Eisenhower made it a point to appear to be aloof and rather disengaged, America's grandfather, period. Jokes abounded about Eisenhower's love of golf, and naps, period. His public speeches were matter-of-fact, Eisenhower was not a dramatic orator, a good Kansan, he got right to the point, without a lot of flourish, period. He was not FDR or Teddy Roosevelt, period. Yet the hidden hand exercised itself when Eisenhower was outside the public eye, a highly active leadership, in which Eisenhower was deeply involved in numerous policy decisions, period. Eisenhower maintained the image of aloofness, and grandfatherliness, while working aggressively behind the scenes to maintain America's centrist politics of the 1950s, period. Eisenhower staunchly opposed Senator Joseph McCarthy's extremism, but he generally did so behind the scenes, maintaining a public face of relative neutrality, period. Likewise, Eisenhower softened some of the programs of the New Deal, but left many of its greatest legacies, such as Social Security, intact, period. Such was the politics of a Kansas Republican, period. New paragraph. All of this started to shift in the late 80s, as conservative activists from Johnson County became increasingly impatient with the tone of their state party, period. As a state with a large agricultural sector, Kansas, and its dominant Republicans frequently focused on policy outcomes, rather than ideological victories. In the U.S. Congress, Kansas Republicans like Dole and Kassebaum aggressively sought agricultural subsidies, and other programs that benefited the farmers back home, period. Taking care of the home state overcame conservative ideology on small government, period. Dole even co-sponsored a major expansion of the food stamps program with liberal South Dakota, Democratic Senator George McGovern, in 1976, period. The goal of Kansas Republicans was to take care of their home state, and keep change incremental, while maintaining a down-to-earth reputation, without a lot of flourish, period. New paragraph. Governor Mike Hayden fit this perfectly, period. Elected in, open parenthesis, check year, close parenthesis, comma. Hayden was known for a folksy demeanor, comma, and the occasional gaffe, period. Hayden hailed from rural, comma, western Kansas, comma, which is not the state's population center, period. Hayden was attentive to agricultural issues, comma, and later would serve as, open parenthesis, check Hayden's jobs, close parenthesis, period. However, comma, Hayden was no ideological firebrand, period. Hayden kept state government functioning, comma, that was his top priority, period. Hayden, comma, and other Republican legislative leaders at that time, comma, avoided the hot-button social issues that had become particularly prominent among certain factions of the National Republican Party, comma, starting with Ronald Reagan's candidacy for president in 1976, comma, and gaining steam when Reagan captured both the nomination, comma, and the presidency, comma, in 1980, period. In the late 1980s, comma, most Kansas Republicans were still pro-choice, comma, at least at the state level, period. At any rate, comma, they pretty much avoided the abortion rights controversy altogether, comma, just keeping it off the political agenda, comma, and focusing on other policies like taking care of farmers, period. However, comma, most Kansans were not farmers, period. The growth of urban, comma, and even more suburban areas meant that Kansas was becoming an increasingly metropolitan state, period. Furthermore, comma, the wealthy, comma, predominantly white climate of suburban Johnson County was fertile ground for the religious right to take root, period. As such, comma, Johnson County legislators became prominent in the, quote, rebel, unquote, movement of the late 80s, period. New paragraph. The legislative rebels argued that the state's Republican Party was not keeping up with the change in direction of the National Republican Party under the Reagan presidency, period. They were upset that Hayden and other Republicans rarely mentioned abortion, period. They didn't just want to hold the line on taxes, comma, as other Republicans did, period. They wanted to cut taxes, period. This was especially important to their constituents, comma, who were wealthier than Kansans as a whole, comma, and therefore paid more under the state's progressive income tax brackets, period. The rebels began to challenge the state's moderate Republican leadership, period. They ran candidates against moderate legislative leaders, comma, sometimes scoring victories, comma, for example, comma, splitting the two houses from one another, comma, so that conservatives would dominate in one chamber and moderates in the other, comma, making it more difficult to get the two houses to agree on legislation, period. The movement gained even more steam in the 1990s, period. One decision which exemplified the split occurred when GOP Chair David Miller resigned his position and declared his candidacy for governor against sitting incumbent Bill Graves, in 1998, period. This was unprecedented, period. The chair of the state Republican Party not only opposed a sitting governor, but actually resigned his position to run against the governor, a prominent moderate, who was pro-choice, period.